We're back with another episode of Before You Buy That Show would give you some straight-up gameplay, and our first impressions of the latest games releasing. It's me, Jake Baldino. And hey, we're talking Starfield. This is a big one to tackle. It's a game that's been in the works for many, many years from a game development studio. Many people love, and some people have been turned off by in recent years. It's a completely new thing from them. It's not an Elder Scrolls or a Fallout sequel. It's an ambitious space exploration game with its own new worlds and lore. So after playing a review, copy, and spending many hours with this game, personal opinion up front here. I like Star. Don't know if I love it. It has a lot of flaws and in some places doesn't quite hit the heights. I was hoping it would. But real simply put, I've enjoyed my time in this game world. If you were hoping Bethesda would make an epic game that would feel nothing like what they've done in the past and be completely glitch-free and change the world, well, then you might be a bit disappointed. But if you're the type of player that was just looking for the next Skyrim, the next Fallout, and just like embracing the Bethesda gameplay and vibe like a warm blanket, then I think you'll be satisfied. Starfield is a complicated one to talk about, and I do think everyone's going to argue about it. It's going to be a divisive one on the surface. It doesn't look very nice. It has weird NPCs. It does have bugs, and the space exploration isn't as endless and as cool as some were hoping. Like I said, it's flawed, but it's an entertaining Bethesda-style game with some charm, some great factions, beautiful music, deep side quests, weird stuff to discover, and some cool lore. It took a while, but for me, the good outweighed the bad for you. I don't know. That's the point of this video. We're going to try and work on that. Let me explain why and break down all the stuff you can expect in the game. And just so you know, this video you see here is as spoiler-free as we could possibly do. You know, in the 100 hours or more, you could spend it in this game. We tried to keep most of the footage on screen here to within the first few hours, just because, there is a lot of good surprises, and I think stuff worth seeing yourself for the first time. And this footage is captured on both Xbox Series X and PC. You'll be able to tell by the frame rate. We'll talk about that all later. So in the game, you start out, you create your character, you pick some defining backstory and traits, and get going. You're a miner on some remote mining planet, and you stumble upon something that quickly gets you whisked away, conscripted into a group called Constellation. They're like a group of space explorers where, in this world, the humans are all over the galaxy and all over planets and just kind of doing the things humans do in the future. Constellation is a small group still just focused on the exploration and the vast mysteries of space. And there's a good main quest here with some good characters. Sure, they look a little awkward, but there's some good voice acting from some of the main companions, and dealing with their personality quirks and life differences is fun. Some of them, especially early on like Sam Coe, have some good charm to them. Spend some time with them while characters may look generic on the surface. Some of them might surprise you. But the actual main quest itself is interesting. Like I said, while your character is not voiced, you still seem to have some agency and choice in how things go down. And there's a good mystery to unravel. Look again. I won't spoil for me personally. I actually just wasn't into the game for the first few hours, though. It takes a while to get its hooks into you. The opening mission is a bit bland. You don't really get that wow moment. And the first city you visit, while being really big and grand, felt a bit boring and weirdly dull. But as you work your way through the main quest line, which I suggest trying to focus on a bit at least up until you get to the city of Neon, that's when the game really unfolds and you're more powerful. You've got a good ship, you're with a faction or so, and learn more about these worlds, and you're just kind of going nuts. And one of the main things of the game, there's a lot of combat, as much as you are an explorer, and you can talk your way out of some things. You're still going to end up killing a lot of dudes. And thankfully, the shooting feels pretty good, depending on your stats. Sometimes enemies will be a little bullet spongy, but not as bad as you'd think. Guns are loud and punchy and aggressive, and the feedback when bullets or lasers hit enemies gives you a nice proper, thwack me is, but you can embrace some stealth. It gets a bit stronger as you level it up, and I never found myself completely 100% stealth in a location. Things would always tend to fall apart from me, but it does seem to be a semi-viable playstyle as long as you're adaptable. It's not overly RPG from numbers and stats and points and magic. More from the gameplay approaches, which I'll get to. But skill tree-wise, it's kept fairly simple as well, with you spending points in one of a few categories to access some benefits. And each of those have their own multiple tiers or levels that you can dump more points into to get more out of it. So to unlock the next tier, it's not about just dumping a point, though. You need to complete, little objectives or, a checkbox challenge first. So, instead of Marrow and an Oblivion, just jumping a ton of times to get better stamina. Now, you actually have, a checklist, say, shoot 20 bad guys to get better at pistols, or carry 75% of your carrying weight for X amount of miles to get an available upgrade to upgrade your, which, holy crap, the game is pretty ruthless with that, or maybe I'm just a hoarder. But these little objectives do get a little bit more complicated once you get further down the tree. I don't know if it was, necessarily needed, but that to me is a minor nitpick, otherwise it works. And I like it back to combat, though. What sold it for me was the weapon variety. There's a good amount, all with their own use cases and manufacturers, from kind of standard to super futuristic, and even some surprises there. There's a lot of good, satisfying choices. Then they also bring over the weapon mod crafting system from Fallout 4 with some tweaks, which I thought was a great system there. You're still going to end up killing a lot of dudes. And thankfully, the shooting feels pretty good, depending on your stats. Sometimes enemies will be a little bullet spongy, but not as bad as you'd think. Guns are loud and punchy and aggressive, and the feedback when bullets or lasers hit enemies gives you a nice proper, thwack me is, but you can embrace some stealth. It gets a bit stronger as you level it up, and I never found myself completely 100% stealth in a location. Things would always tend to fall apart from me, but it does seem to be a semi-viable playstyle as long as you're adaptable. It's not overly RPG from numbers and stats and points and magic. More from the gameplay approaches, which I'll get to. But skill tree-wise, it's kept fairly simple as well, with you spending points in one of a few categories to access some benefits. And each of those have their own multiple tiers or levels that you can dump more points into to get more out of it. So to unlock the next tier, it's not about just dumping a point, though. You need to complete, little objectives or, a checkbox challenge first. So, instead of Marrow and an Oblivion, just jumping a ton of times to get better stamina. Now, you actually have, a checklist, say, shoot 20 bad guys to get better at pistols, or carry 75% of your carrying weight for X amount of miles to get an available upgrade to upgrade your, which, holy crap, the game is pretty ruthless with that, or maybe I'm just a hoarder. But these little objectives do get a little bit more complicated once you get further down the tree. I don't know if it was, necessarily needed, but that to me is a minor nitpick, otherwise it works. And I like it back to combat, though. What sold it for me was the weapon, and also very relaxed here. It makes very pretty staggering amount of options and things to hunt for and craft and work towards. And you're getting weapons, spacesuits out of space, clothing, and lots of resources for your journey. And yeah, you can sneak into someone's apartment or a shop and steal stuff just like any other Bethesda game. But you're usually getting the best stuff by exploring, and exploring is complicated. Unfortunately, it's a bit too weird for my liking. There are a lot of cool planets and big cities, and in some towns, there are also a bunch of randomly generated worlds. Now, Bethesda was upfront about this. They set expectations about how they were randomly generated and how they worked. But it doesn't feel quite right. So exploration itself is a lot of loading screens and menus. You can look at a big map warp to a new sector and float around and look at a planet, maybe talk to another pedestrian ship, do a few things. Then you look at the planet with your scanner, and then you can see everywhere you can really land, or really what the planet has to offer. Then you click on that, and then a loading screen, and then you're landed. Then you have to click Leave the ship when you're landed, and then it loads you out there briefly. You don't just hop off. So you see there's like a lot of barriers. The presentation, the boringness of just clicking around on a map or a scanner all really hurts the experience. It's not as bright as it comes off initially. You know, presenting you with fuel consumption and a bunch of numbers to seem science. You're really just clicking on stuff. It's a bummer. Same goes for actually scanning stuff on the planet's surface. Not the greatest thing from a fun standpoint, but yeah, speaking of planet surfaces, from that whole planet to landing sequence I mentioned once you're out there, if you're on randomly generated planet, you roam around what is typically a pretty ugly biome, slowly sprinting and running out, a stamina jet boosting around and checking out abandoned factories or caves that typically have a door to click on and load into what is like a typical Bethesda dungeon. And from there, you can usually blast your way through and get some decent loot. It doesn't always amount to too much, and it doesn't usually have anything complex, but it does mean it feels like you can kind of endlessly space dungeon run. It may not be of the highest quality, and you may see some stuff repeat every so often. I found myself landing on a planet and seeing something cool and walking towards it and finding something totally weird. But most of the time to me, it felt a little dull, and I preferred focusing on like the towns and the quests and activities, because the more you get into those, the better it gets. And holy shit, they give you a lot, like from expeditions where you're just looking for stuff to getting into some messes with the faction quests and their own individual activity. Within 2 random long-running quests you'll get from like a shop or some guided job postings. There's a staggering amount of stuff to do in this game. Oh, and even piracy, which does remind me I should mention the ship stuff. So when you're in orbit, you can engage with other ships, like chat with them, or get into combat. Combat is fairly simple, but pretty good. It gets the job done. You can actually kind of do that from Fallout, like get a good lock on the ship, and it zooms into them in slow motion, and then you can choose to target, say their shield generator first, and then go for their engines with a different weapon, something like that. How capable your ship actually is, though, depends on how you build it, and then you can cycle power to engines to speed up, maybe disperse a bit of power to weapons to have more power behind them, or put it all towards your
I mean, it feels like a Bethesda game you've seen before from gameplay, to just like the feel, the vibe of it all. But that also boils down to weird, silly, buggy things that will happen in the game. Like I'll walk into my ship and see a crewmate hovering 2 FT above the ground or clipping through a kitchen table. Now, during a conversation with an NPC, another character will walk into frame and the camera will wig out as they clip through them and do something funny. People will disappear in a blink. Like if you've seen it in a previous game of theirs, you might see it here. You might not see it as much, like as often, but that goofiness is still there. Does it break the game? No. Haven't really had any catastrophic issues other than getting stuck on a chair and having to reload my save, but it can break immersion a bit. It's not a disaster, but you'll see some weird stuff. Occasionally. Some people are more sensitive to this stuff, so it's always worth bringing up. All that stuff does, however, contribute to making the game feel a bit old in spots. Some towns are rich with detail and have a surprisingly dense amount of NPCs on screen. But other areas like the planet terrain, or even some sections of, say, New Atlantis just look flat and drab and weird, especially at a lot of times of day. And that's on PC and Xbox versions of the game. It's just not the cleanest or newest looking game. And it's a shame considering the massive scope of everything, the town density, like I said, is great oftentimes. And when you're in space, the planets and the effects and the asteroids look pretty great. Or say if you're on a moon looking up at like Saturn and it's casting a light, that stuff is awesome. But the experience, for the most part, it was a very solid 30 on the PC side. Of course, everybody's machine is. There's a lot of options too, like small ships, space trucks for hauling a bigger battleship. And I just loved adding on to my ship and then seeing it on the landing pad in real time and going, whoa, and then going in the ship and seeing how the interior changed. Like, it's all satisfying and addictive. I got hooked on this, like I did building settlements and Fallout 4, and it just improved the whole experience. Even if I was dissatisfied with a lot of the space exploration, seeing the ship I made in action landing on planets docked at a city was cool as hell. And I found myself saving up for new engine or a new type of weapon to mount on it all the time. These were the main points we wanted to hit today. Really? There's a lot of game here. And despite spending a lot of time with it, we haven't seen every inch of it. There's both stuff we couldn't spoil here, and also just a lot of secrets to uncover stuff that we haven't even come across yet. Starfield is a flawed game with some aspects that just don't quite reach the heights. They should, but it has plenty of merits. And the more time you put into it, the more it shows you its, flavors. We're probably going to be talking about this one for a while. It is a Bethesda game. I was expecting really even more so than I thought if you like Bethesda games. Even with this one's significant shortcomings, you might like this one now. It didn't do everything I wanted it to do, but I like the characters, the world, the civilizations, cool science and guns and ships. And as much as have my complaints, I'm looking forward to continue playing it. And I pretty much recommend it, obviously depending on the type of player you are and your expectations for this game. Hopefully I laid it out enough for you.